All right, welcome back, everybody. We have with us today Elijah Lamb, a repeat guest. Hello, Elijah. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous. And yourself?
I'm so good. The best ever.
That's awesome. Okay, so we're a little late to this. It's not like it just happened yesterday, but everybody about I don't know a week and a half, 2 weeks ago or so was talking about the Olympics and the opening ceremony and all this stuff. And on one hand, I think your everyday Christian, I just mean people who are not in vocational ministry, are trying to figure out like what should the response be? Should we be outraged? Should like when people
Yep.
mock Christians, and I don't know if there's anything more sacred than the picture of the Lord's Supper, maybe other than maybe like the picture of like the cross or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you had written some thoughts on this. I thought it was really key. What are your thoughts on this? Like, how should Christians feel when in the Olympics, which is an international, worldwide event, one of the most seen on television things that happen every few years? Were you upset? Did you laugh at it? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, my initial reaction is, why are you so weird? Like I feel like when I look at weird cultural things, that's always my first thought is like,
Yeah.
you're so strange. And why? Why are you trying so hard to be weird? When I look at it, I'm like, okay, this is a kind of blasphemy. I think that some things are worse than others, but I look at this, I'm like, that's blasphemy. That's what that is. To make a mockery of, a really central Christian moment. That's what that is. And so I'm not going to tell any given believer how they should like viscerally
Hmm.
respond to blasphemy, like the way that they should feel. Everybody is going to react to those things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Um, but the question is like, how should I think about that? Like, what do I think is wrong there? What do I think the church needs to do? What does that tell me about the state of, at the very least, France's culture?
Hmm.
I hate the French, so this just reaffirms some of those feelings I have. I think France is in my top three least favorite countries on the planet, and so it just made me feel better about that. I'm kidding, not really though.
It's
So
okay. We're
it
gonna pray about that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it will get it out of me. I didn't feel like personal offense. I didn't see this and go, "Oh, this is a post that is aimed at Elijah Lamb, International Global Apostolic Ministries." Like I didn't feel that. But
Hmm.
I do feel a frustration, and it does make me feel worried because I look at the other cultural events happening in a place like France. I'm like, hey, your country's not looking so hot right now. Things are like not going super well for you. And I don't think blaspheming the Lord's Supper is like the next best move for you. I think that people in France, people that I love and that God loves, will flourish when they're obedient to Christ. That's the case for all human beings.
Hmm.
And so to see them make an open, flagrant mockery of Christ, I'm like, guys, we're moving in the wrong direction. I want you as a people and as a nation to prosper and to do well, and people in your country to be safe, happy, holy, and healthy. Like, that's what I desire for you. And I know that's not going to happen if you continue in the direction that you're going, of embracing darkness and rejecting the light. So that's
Why?
that's how I felt.
Yeah, why do you think that this keeps happening? Like, there's been musical artists who make music videos, and it's mocking Christianity or whatever. And I definitely, with those things, most of the time I think, you know, like people would be like, do you think that they are part of the Illuminati, or like they really do worship and sacrifice the devil? And I go,
Yeah.
listen, I don't know, but here's what I do know. Like, there's at minimum some musical artists are being distasteful intentionally because it's going to get outrage, and because therefore it's going to get attention. Is there
Yeah.
something spiritually dark happening beyond that? Possibly, but I don't know. But whenever those happen, I think like essentially these are people just trolling for the most part. For the most part,
Yeah.
but but this did feel different in the sense of it's a stinking sporting event. This isn't like some raunchy hip hop song from some dude who like is always raunchy. Like, it's the Olympic. It's so weird. Why do you think? Why do you think culture, like secular culture today, is making so much more fun of Christianity than Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam. Or, I mean, do you think like Christians are uniquely being targeted right now? And not in some sense of like we're victims, but like I just don't see it happening as a reality. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think part of it is that Christianity is just a lot more iconic
Right,
than Hinduism, you know? Like we
right.
have all the most iconic artistic imagery in human history.
Hmm.
So, you know, that's why for their like little ceremony thing, they're borrowing from the Greeks and from Christianity.
Hmm.
That's those are the two like most recognizable um, eras and times of art. When you study art history, like there's a shift that happens, and then suddenly everything is Christian. And so, yeah, like as far as art goes, we have all the most iconic imagery, and so that's why they'd be pulling from Christianity rather than Hinduism. But I do think it is reasonable to say like it's just cringe the way that culture is super comfortable um, mocking Christianity, doing things distastefully. I can understand
Yeah.
wanting to borrow Christian imagery, but distastefully like mocking it, that it's just cringe. And I think it's obnoxious that it only happens to Christianity and none of the other. It's always so funny that like the finger people wave at Christians is like, oh, like you think your religion's the one right religion? There's 6,000 religions in the world, and my bit that I like to say there is always like, okay, name 10. I dare you to name 10. There's
Right.
thousands. Seriously, get if you can get to double digits, like I'll give you $1 million. It'll never happen. But the
Yeah.
accusation that's meant to demean Christianity is there's all these religions and you think you're right. I'm like, okay, well, if all religion is bad, then make fun of all of them.
Sure.
I feel more confident in my faith when I'm the only one that gets culturally mocked. I'm like, yeah, we must just be the strongest one. It must be the other ones just must be too easy to make fun of. They must
Right.
be so much more obviously stupid
Yeah.
and ridiculous that Christianity is the only one that people can they feel comfortable making fun of.
Yeah, there is something interesting about that last point you made because like even with the idea of sarcasm, the reason it can like be hurtful if you use it in a certain way is because there's typically truth mixed in with some sort of exaggeration or
Yeah.
misrepresentation, and it makes it sarcastic. But like, you could be sarcastic in a mean way because there's some sort of truth in there. But okay, let's talk about this though, because I thought you made a great point, and maybe you can elaborate on this. There's a difference between, maybe an individual rejecting Christ or mocking Christ versus a nation.
Yeah.
Um, okay, can you expand on that and what that means? Because I thought everything you had said in that post regarding the Olympics was good, but I thought that was a great way of articulating it. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I think part of what I was expressing there is like I don't again because I don't feel personal offense about the post. I don't feel personally attacked. And when I look at an individual who renounces Christ, I'm kind of like,
Hmm.
okay, do your thing. I'm not gonna freak out about that. I'm not going to, be worried about that. I'm not gonna be frustrated by that. But when a
Right.
nation does something that implies rejection of Christ, that's bothersome to me because that's an indication of like what is that people like overall. And if the larger body of a society is willing to look past blasphemy and just
Hmm.
they don't care, it doesn't bother them.
Yeah.
Like there are certain things that should when you're like a morally upright person and you're trying to be good, there are certain things like mockeries of beauty and goodness and truth should make you feel like there's something wrong about it. That's an indication that someone is there. It's an indication of where someone is and where a people are morally. And
Yeah.
so for me, like when I look at a whole nation rejecting Christ, I'm like, this is an indication that an entire society is rejecting Jesus,
Hmm.
is rejecting truth, and is headed down a path that is not good.
Yeah.
Because France, especially their society, their law, their governmentation, like everything about the philosophy that goes behind their political life, and you know it's all based in Christian morality. It all
Right.
comes with the presupposition that all people are made in the image of God, that everyone has a soul, that all people are uniquely and individually valuable. There's a reason, I talk a lot about this in the course that I did on why Christianity is good for the world. There's a reason I don't want to live. None of us want to live in ancient Rome because it was terrible. There's a reason I don't want to go live in a I don't want to go live in India. I'm just going to be
Right.
honest. I don't want to
Yeah.
live there because I
Right.
can read
Yeah.
about what their culture is like and what's happening there. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to live in a pagan world. I have no interest in that. So Christianity is what killed paganism. And to
Yeah.
deny Christianity, it inevitably is going to lead to an embracing of neo-paganism, which is bad for people. It's bad for people's hearts, for their souls, and for their bodies, which is
Hmm.
the clearest and obvious one with abortion and all the transgender stuff. Like we're seeing how far that's going already with the way that it's affecting people's physical and mental health. Like it's clearly just not good for people.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, even Richard Dawkins, like, I don't know, 8 months ago, I think it was 9 months ago. Um, he, this is the first time I've ever heard him say this. I mean, he's lived a life. If people know who Richard Dawkins is, famous, what they call one of the four horsemen of new atheism.
Yeah.
Famous atheist for a long time. Thinks Christianity and just theism in general is like the stupidest thing that's ever happened to
Right.
humanity. And I think he's also cringe. Like it's that's a different topic. But even him about 9 months ago said publicly that he's a cultural Christian. And for
Yep.
somebody who rejects Christ, and not only Christ, but all forms of theism, and thinks that they are absolutely insane, even that man who has no biblical foundation or root at all recognizes there's no other worldview that produces, a culture like Christianity does. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read Tom Holland, not Peter Parker Spider-Man, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Dominion.
Yeah.
But fascinating when he talks about the Me Too movement in Hollywood years ago, and he says that all these women. He says, what are the women asking men to do? Essentially, they're asking men to be faithful to their wives, to respect women, to treat them with dignity, and to live a life of purity and things like that. And he said that even the Me Too movement is criticizing it's criticizing people with Christian virtues.
Right. Exactly.
And so when American culture looks at the church and they go, how could you guys believe this, that, and the other? They are pointing at us and they're using our own value system.
Right.
I mean, it's so ironic, it's like,
Yeah. That's our
yeah,
heritage. You know
exactly.
that virtue that you think is important. You think that's important because of our
us.
tradition. Yeah.
So even if they think we're hypocritical, they would have to at least agree that we're right about the moral standard,
Right.
which is the irony of this all.
Totally.
So, yeah, I mean, okay, what do you think about this? I try to be a little bit more optimistic than pessimistic. And I think naturally I tend to be that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it depends on the subject, but just I tend to be a little bit more optimistic than maybe some of my friends who are like, man, the world's going downhill. I'm like, well, yeah, but, insert, something there. I, you do, but it's undeniable that there is this continuous, ever since the sexual revolution, there's this continuous kind of momentum building
Yeah.
of cultures, nations, governments who are the tide is shifting, and I just don't. I have thoughts, but I don't know exactly where it's going. I mean, have you recognized that as well?
Yeah. Totally. It feels like we're just kind of rolling downhill.
Yeah, yeah, and it's going to be interesting because what I think it does now, not to make this explicitly political, but regardless of what anybody thinks about Trump and now Kamala Harris or anything like that, the best thing, whether you believe it was, an inside job or not, the best thing that happened for Donald J. Trump was the Mar-a-Lago situation and them trying to put him in jail and then him getting shot, almost dying.
Right.
His ratings went up on the right. He gained more money, like all of that. And I wonder what's going to happen when I think about like the religious landscape. It's like the more it gets mocked, I think it will cause people to not drift in the middle, but it will make both sides kind of like bolder. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it's all going to end.
Yeah. Every time I see something, I'm like, this is just making me into more of a religious extremist. Like,
Sure.
thank you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm more passionate about not being what you are.
Right.
I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about recently. Um, I, I I always want to challenge people when they adopt a way of thinking or a way of living to consider like, okay, the person that you're emulating in the thing that you think or the decision that you're making, because no one's really unique or original. Like, how did their life go? And do
Mhm.
you want to live their life? So when I look at postmodernism, for example, which is like a basically the philosophical root of why our world looks the way it does right now.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you read postmodern literature and you interact with it, you're like, oh wow, like that's where this started, blew up in
We're-
the universities, and then everything kind of comes down from there.
Can
Um,
you just real quickly, for somebody maybe listening to this on the podcast or maybe watching this, like I'm not looking for like a in-depth description of what postmodernism is, but can you just explain even generally what you mean
yeah,
by that if somebody's totally unfamiliar?
yeah. Okay, so modernism is like, hey, as individuals, we can find and ascertain the truth, and that's something that we
Right.
should do. Postmodernism is rejecting that and going, that's why it's post. No, we don't like that. Actually, there's no way that anyone can come to real truthful conclusions, and so that's where you get like the most obvious signs is subjectivism, relativism. Like
Hmm.
everything's subjective, nothing is really true. And
Right.
I've never heard someone actually say like my truth. I always hear people like make fun of that, and I've never heard anyone say that in my life. So I'm
Not
hoping
even
maybe
in
that
videos?
no, not even in a video.
Oh,
I've
I've seen
never
people do that.
I've never genuinely seen it. I've only ever
Yeah.
heard like "live your truth" in like a mocking tone.
Sure.
So I don't know if that's as serious as I think that's fundamentally how most people live. I just never heard it
Yeah.
articulated that way.
Sure.
And so it's kind of their whole thing is like any kind of glasses that you put on that frame the way you view the world, you need to take those off. That's what
Right.
deconstruction is. It's so you look at the world through you the presupposition of theism or of Christianity. And so you believe
Hmm.
Christianity's claims are true, so you look at the world through a Christian lens. And they're like, that's bad because nothing's really true. We need to just get rid of that. That's basically so then it's just living a life constantly of going like nobody can really know how anything is and you need to be suspicious of everything all the time, and it's just like this constant pessimism about the world, and it's not
Hmm.
good for people to view the world that way. And I think what it leads to is it leads to nihilism. So nihilism is just like nothing really matters, so do whatever you want.
Right.
That's the logical conclusion of someone going like, yeah, there's really no meaning. And so one of the fathers of postmodernism is a guy named Michael Foucault, and he does all this writing and puts a lot of these ideas forward. And then you read about like the tail end of his life. He moved to Africa and is known to have like serially raped a bunch of boys in Africa. And I'm like, okay, I don't want that guy's ideas. I
Right.
don't want to view the world the way that guy viewed the world because he sucked. So
Yeah.
I that's what I want to challenge people on is like, okay, you figure out where the things that you believe came from. If your
Yeah.
ideas came from Nietzsche, go look at his life and figure out the way his life ended. Do you want to live that guy's life? I
Yeah.
look at Christians in history and I'm like, I look at the things they believed and I'm like, yeah, I want, or even just, not even just in history. I look at the people I know that are elderly, that have their lives together, whose their families are not broken, they're not divorced, their kids love them, they're connected to their grandchildren, they're not living in poverty, like they have lots of friends, they're not going to get sent off to a home. Like, yeah, I want to be there in 60 years. I want that to be me. So what I believe is really important. Like what has set them apart? It's well, they believe in Jesus. And that belief in Jesus convicts them to live a certain way. And so I want to follow in their footsteps. I feel like I just have to challenge people to think like the lifestyle and the belief system that you're emulating and that you're copying, where does it lead people?
Yeah.
Does it lead to flourishing? Does it lead to good? Does it lead to beauty? If it doesn't, then you shouldn't do that. You're not going to
Yeah.
be the first person to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, there's Bonhoeffer talks about how there's this disconnect with categories that people have in secularism, or I mean just outside of Christianity, how the spiritual and the material are disconnected in this in spiritual matters, but the physical doesn't. And he's not talking about Gnosticism as much as he's just saying it's kind of like what Corinth is struggling with. Like Corinth, at one point, I can't remember what chapter, but Paul essentially tells them, that you say this, the food, your stomach is made for food.
Right.
And, and he's likening this phrase that they use, to what, how they're viewing their bodies in sexual immorality. And they're like, well, the body's made for sex, so you just have sex, and your stomach's made for food, so you just eat food. And you just
Right.
kind of, it doesn't really matter what you do with your body. It's like this disconnect between the material and the immaterial. And I haven't read this in so long, so I could be remembering this incorrectly and possibly misquoting C.S. Lewis. But I think it's attributed to C.S. Lewis where he says, you are a body, or you are a soul with a body. And maybe there's more context there that I don't understand, but I just fundamentally disagree. I mean, I've never met anybody, I don't know if you have, who doesn't have a body. You are your body. If somebody punches you in the face, they're punching you.
Right.
Like, your body is you. It's not like the real you is the immaterial you. The real you is physically you. You're all one component. But yeah, and so then you have like the sexual revolution where it's like, as we mentioned earlier, but it's like your body doesn't matter. This is what leads to all these things in culture today.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite extreme. It's like no soul, just
Right.
body.
Right. Timothy Keller, it's one of my favorite quotes. He said this. He says that the world is promiscuous with their body, and they cling tightly to their money. He says, but the church should cling tightly to their bodies and be promiscuous with its money.
That's
And
cool.
he explains that the world views money as if it has soul and it's breathing and it should be cared for, and that's why they hold on tightly with it. And they have a low view of the body, where the church should view money as not something that's breathing or has a soul, but they should view their bodies that way. And I thought that was one of the best diagnosis I've heard from Timothy Keller on culture today, and it's so true.
Yeah, that it reminds me of what Peter says in 1 Peter 2:11. He says, "Dear friends, I urge you as strangers and exiles to abstain from sinful desires that wage war against the soul." I love that phrase.
That's
And again,
good.
that's why, when I'm looking at France, it's not this like bigoted, I hate you, be Christian thing. I really love the people that God has created, and I want what's best for them.
Yeah.
And I know that rebelling against the way, there's this idea in philosophy that like the best way to live, you want to orient your life in a way where you're not going against the grain of created order. So
Right.
so just for example, like in physics, you don't want to live as though gravity is not true because it is. And if
Right.
you find yourself like trying to go against the grain of the way our universe is designed, that gravity is a thing, that's a scientific law, at least, that's what it's like. You want to try to contradict that. Okay, go jump off a building, bro. Gravity will win.
Right.
That's how it works. And so that is going to destroy you. It's going to be destructive for you. The same thing, there's what's called like there's metaphysical rules. There's beyond just the things that we touch, but our universe has rules. God
Right.
created it in such a way that some things lead to good and some things lead to bad. That's essentially what the Proverbs are. It's Solomon trying to like uncover those. It's these truisms where he's like,
Yeah.
generally, this is going to lead to this, and this is going to lead to this. These are the laws that he is seeing God has infused our world with. He's like,
Right.
it's just Solomon going, this is the way things work. I
Right.
tried and tested, and you should follow this. And if you try to go against this, it's not going to be good for you. So I'm looking and going, hey, like when people reject Christ and they reject the wisdom of God and they choose the wisdom of men, which is foolishness, that's going to wage war against your soul.
Yeah.
Because you're not just a body, and just doing whatever you want is actually never going to be good for you. And that's that's the best part of Christianity. Not the best part, but it's one of the great parts of Christian virtue is that we have limiting virtues. So we're told like to have self-control and have gratitude and to have humility and to have selflessness. Like those put limitations on what humans want to do.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to just do whatever Elijah wants, according to Christ. I have to kill some of those things. And that's actually what's
Yeah.
best for me. And
Yeah.
I find that I'm happiest. I'm
Yeah.
happiest when I'm doing what I know Jesus wants for me and not just whatever I can come up with,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I was reading yesterday John 21, where where Peter, right after he denies Jesus. I don't think that's recorded in John, but it does record when they go fishing and Jesus is on the shore.
Right.
And man, that has got to be the biggest guilt trip ever. Could you imagine? Like, you just cursed on Jesus' name to like prove your disloyalty to him. All the other disciples follow after you because you're the leader of the group and you're all fishing. And then there's Jesus on the shore, making breakfast. And, but it was interesting to me because after he asked him 3 times, if you love me, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. Obviously, Peter's distressed. And this part just stuck out to me so much where he says, when you were young, you dressed the way you wanted to dress and you went where you wanted to went and you did what you wanted to do. But as you get older, you will stretch out your hands and somebody will clothe you in what you do not want to wear, and you'll go where you don't want to go. And obviously it's talking about his death. And I just felt like, I don't know if it was just my mind thinking of different stuff, or it was probably the Holy Spirit, but kind of this application where I was like, man, Lord, I want to like die to those things, whatever that is in my life. And like, I was just having this prayerful moment of, yeah, it's crucifying the flesh. And it's like, it's limiting virtues, you said. I think that's great. Let's talk about this, because I think that I think a lot of Christians in churches go, yeah, I know the church has done some good stuff. I know the church has also done some bad stuff. And they don't feel really equipped when somebody's like, when there's some big objection to Christian institutions or Christianity as a whole. And what would be, because you just did a course on this, what would be one, or if there's two you want to reference, you can, but what's one big objection that people usually throw out, and a rebuttal or response? Maybe it's a myth against the church. What would you say?
Yeah, I think even in some of the comments on one of the reels that the Theos account shared, where I was just talking about how like Christianity is the greatest force for moral good in human history. Lots of people are like, they raise their finger at that because they've just been told that Christianity bad. And I'm like,
Right.
dude, you're never going to believe this. I literally, that's what the course is about. You could just watch it. Like, stop being weird. But I think, the Crusades always come up, which is just like, you ever hear somebody bring up the time leading up to the Crusades when like the Muslim Empire was just doing terrible, horrible things everywhere? You ever heard that criticism even one time?
Yeah.
No? And I think there's it goes well with something Chesterton says, where he's like, when the church does evil things, that's actually an apologetic case for why the church needs to exist. Because the church needs to exist as a force that doesn't let its people do bad things. You don't ever hear that criticism against Islam, because we all assume that Muslims are going to, when they follow the Quran, are going to do bad things.
Right.
That contradict the virtue that we know is important. So we don't look at Muslims doing terrible, horrible things when they're building this empire throughout Europe and as they're conquesting. Like, we don't look at that and raise our hands to that and go, oh, why'd they do that? Because it just makes sense.
Yes.
But when the Christians, and there are things that were wrong in the Crusades, 1,000%.
Right.
And I think that something I talk about in the course is like, I actually talked about the Crusades briefly. Most scholars today are kind of starting to say that we've been historically pretty dramatic about the Crusades, and they were not. They just weren't as bad as we've made them out to be. And Josh Bidell's course actually on the Crusades is really helpful understanding.
It's really
that.
good. Yeah. There was actually. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're good. Go ahead.
Well, there's actually a guy in my church who, really nice guy. I just got coffee with him a few weeks ago, and he's been coming to our church for a little over, well, I don't know, I think a little over a year. But he came up to me, I don't know, 2 months ago. He's like, hey, I would love to just get to know you. I was like, dude, I would love to get to know you, because we've just seen each other at church. So we planned a coffee date, and we're sitting down, and he was telling me that he loves to read, and he said something I had said in a sermon made him just go, hey, I want to study this. And that led him actually to reading about the Crusades. I wasn't even talking about the Crusades, and so he tells me that he's like reading about the Crusades, and he goes, dude, it's interesting because I watched this YouTube channel. It's this big nerdy channel that goes into history on the medieval era, Crusades, all that stuff. And he goes, I thought the guy was pretty fair, but he kind of knocked Christians on a lot of stuff. He goes, I went and bought some books and started reading. And he's like, I've read 3 books on this, and I just tried to find stuff that was written by historians. He goes, dude, and I kind of went, yeah, Christians messed up a little bit. He goes, but if they hadn't done what they did, he goes, the world would be in a lot worse place right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was like smiling, because I was like, dude, yes. I don't know any Christian who doesn't admit that we make faults. But but this is great, because the point you made earlier, like if you look at the Quran and you look at, their worldview, if you ask where it leads to, the logical conclusion is some stuff that Christianity would say is utterly sinful and evil.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think like when people bring up these historical examples to try and dump on it, I always feel like, oh, you don't really know history very well because they
Right.
bring up the
Yeah.
wrong examples. Like if
Right.
I'm being honest, the one of the bigger examples that I think should be brought up when people are questioning whether the church has
Hmm.
done good in history is the 30 Years' War. When Catholics and Protestants in Western Europe were killing each other, it's one of the bloodiest wars in human history. Like, yeah, that's one of those things I want to wrestle with that. I want to talk about why that happened. And I want to get in there and think about like, man, is
Sure.
this stuff church endorsed or is this just, you can look at Ireland and you're going, oh, Catholics and Protestants hate each other there and they say it's their Catholicism and their Protestants that make them hate each other. But is that really the case? Like, is that really what's going on? And I think, one of the other examples is slavery. The transatlantic slave trade is always what comes up and you're like, okay, well, let me just break this down to you. Like, late medieval history is the first time slavery is eliminated in our world, and it's because of the church. Like, that was the
Yeah.
monks were fighting to end slavery, and it happened. And then it starts again during that colonial period, and it would be so convenient on an issue like this to just be Catholic, because this is one of those ones where I just want to be like, man, I just wish I was Catholic on this one, because the Pope at that time was like, "Yo, slave trade is terrible. Don't do that. It's evil." So Catholics just were unanimously not participating in it because the Pope put out an edict and was like, "This is terrible."
Right.
Whereas in England and in America, there's a bit more of a wrestle where like Christians aren't actually agreeing on this. That's the important thing. Is
Hmm.
even in something where you can look and go, "Oh, Christians did a bad thing." Okay, are all the Christians in agreement on that bad thing? Or is there an interfighting that's happening? And then we look and go, okay, according to the Bible and the historic Christian belief on this issue, which side was right? And that's the great thing about having a book from God that contains the things that we should do and the things that we should think. It's pretty easy to look at an argument and go, at least like an ethical argument rather than just like a theological one,
Yeah.
who's on the right side of history in this one? And I can look at the abolitionists and go, those guys. Those guys were the ones who understood the Bible and were not weaponizing things and misinterpreting the Bible and whatever. Those guys are the ones who are being consistent with the rest of Christian history.
Yeah. I think this is why, like the little catchphrases that, I mean, I don't know about you. I know we kind of grew up in different church circles, but like I would hear this from time to time at like some big youth conference gathering type thing or whatever,
Yeah.
where it was like, oh, I don't have my Bible with me, but it was like, this Bible right here, it's God's greatest love letter to you. And, like you hear these little phrases, and then, the older you get, the more you're just like, uh, there's an element of truth I understand of what they're saying. Yes, this is describing in climax the incarnation and how Jesus Christ comes and the kingdom of God comes. And yes, and
Yeah.
he loves me and he wants to save me. Absolutely. But I'm like, it's just an oversimplification. And then what you get is you get these people who are like, the scriptures don't like actually govern, their decision making, or it's not viewed that way. It's like, it's not a
Yeah.
book of rules and regulations. It's like, well, it is a book of rules. I mean, the New Testament is not like void of law. It's not like
Yeah.
it's not like
There's the
Christians don't
law
have
of
laws.
Christ.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
plenty of laws, dude. So it's just the oversimplifications of stuff that you hear. It's like, this is God's love letter. This is, just it's like, well, that's oversimplifying something. Like, what are you
Yeah.
insinuating?
Yeah, it's almost like an attempt to make the Bible sound more attractive that actually doesn't work. Like,
It
I
doesn't.
don't want the whole Bible to just be the Psalms. I don't want the whole Bible to just be a love letter. I actually do want practical wisdom, and I do
Yes.
want theology. I do want to know what God thinks about this, that, and the other. Like, I want that. I want something that works for my whole life. That's what I've begun to appreciate about Christianity that I didn't really get before. I just viewed Christianity as like is a religion, but then getting that it's a religious philosophy. It's a whole life
Yeah.
thing. Like there is a Christian way to do everything.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate of the Bible. It leaves like no stone unturned. So I have a Christian understanding of how I should work, of how I should do family, of how I should do friendship, of how the church should be shaped. Like there's
Yeah.
everything we need is there. And so the Bible wouldn't be sufficient. It wouldn't be effective if it was just a big love letter. No, there's more to it than that. I'm glad there are those really pretty passages that make me feel the warm sunshine of God's precious love for me as his son. But there's
Right.
more to it than that. And I'm glad that
Yes.
that's there. Paul saying
Yeah.
act like a man in 1 Corinthians 16 doesn't make me
Right.
feel like I'm getting a love letter, but it does make me feel something good. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, maybe let's circle back around and we can kind of end on this because I would love to hear your thoughts. Um, what I'm about to talk about, I know you're familiar, but just to give you a little bit, to give people a little bit of context, there's a guy that has really blown up on the internet probably in the last year and a half. Um, maybe we talked about this actually, or this person in the last episode we did, but Redeem Zoomer.
Yeah.
And his prescription for how to see the tide turn is basically to see an overhaul of institutions and to not to for Christians to stop running away from institutions and to reclaim them from the liberal grip that's on them and all that. And he has a huge problem with non-denominationalism and stuff like that. Now, I just want to set up this question this way. I think a lot of some of his critiques on non-denominationalism and evangelicals and things like that are fair, and they're critiques that I would have as well.
Yeah.
I think that some of his critiques are just not rooted in reality, and there's a little bit of there's a bias on my end too, but I think there's a huge bias.
Yeah.
So I set that up to say this. Neither of us are prophets that see perfectly through the glass. We see dimly. Neither of us are experts in anything. So I'm not asking for some worldwide expert take, but how do you think we see the tide turn? Is
Yeah.
it like, what is your prayer and hope in terms of seeing a real shift like in our country? Is it the ARC model of we need to plant more churches, just more churches, more churches, more churches? Great. Is it like, no, dude, we got to take over the universities. We have to go, we all need to leave our churches, go to Lutheranism or, PCUSA. Like, is it, we just need revival in the streets? Like, what would be some of your thoughts? How are we going to see actually America, some changes happen? Legislation? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a lot of things. I would love it.
Right.
As a charismatic, I want it to be just one thing. I want it to be we need to have 10 more prayer meetings, and we need to have 10 prayer meetings a week where we pray for we yearn and we intercede and we groan. We have an
Yeah.
unction for revival. You know,
Unction. Yeah.
God, bring revival to my generation. And I'm like about to throw up because I'm screaming into the microphone.
Right.
I would love to think that that is going to be the one thing that tips the scales. And it's
Yeah.
important, but it's not the whole story. It's not, you know, prayer is to try to do it without prayer is a really terrible, stupid idea. So I do believe that prayer is going to be the fuel that if our culture shifts and if things really change, that's going to be the thing that we ultimately look back on and go like people prayed and
Yeah.
that was important. It's when I look at when Christians did this the first time and they won the culture war, the people who won it were the monks. And they were the guys who were in prayer all the time, but they weren't just praying. They took
Right.
responsibility, and they built the university. I will say that taking back institutions, specifically the university, is really important. And I think that the world needs Christian scholarship
Yeah.
that is really good because when we look at the it's so interesting when we look at so just to bring Redeem Zoomer back up. I'm a Redeem Zoomer hater, by the way. I swipe up and just like hate on things he says all the time, so he leaves me unseen now, and I feel a little bit bad, but not all the way. I'm just like I just am a troll.
For
I
sure.
love a lot of his takes actually, but some of them I'm just like this is an echo chamber. This is just
Sure. Sure.
this is not working.
Yeah.
But my favorite take of his that I absolutely agree with is that we have to retake the university because the reason so many mainline denominations have gone progressive is because of the university. Like that's where it's because seminaries went liberal. So then all the priests and everybody else went liberal, and
Right.
it trickled down. And so I think Christians taking back the universities is really important. That shapes the way that people think and act.
Yeah.
So prayer, taking back the university, but also just I think Christians need to live lives and preach the gospel in a way that corresponds to the age that we're living in. I think we're living in a hedonistic age, an age of people just thinking what can I do to make me happy, and I don't know what's going to happen. So it's just they're all slaves to their stomachs, just following it wherever it goes. And
Yeah.
I think that's terrible. And I think it doesn't, again, it's the whole thing. People are living lives with such little virtue, with such little goodness and righteousness, with such little wisdom that their lifestyle is destroying them. Christians need to be the happiest people on the planet. Who, like I'm saying, oh, you should look at Michael Foucault and go, I don't want to be a postmodernist. You should look at a Christian and go, I want to be one of those people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the whole like just live your best life and people they'll want to become Christians. That happens, I think, one time that I can find in the Bible. What I think is that people need to, their life needs to be an apologetic that is proof of Christianity is better than the
Yeah.
way that you're living. I want to be able to preach the gospel and go, for me, I want to bump into someone I went to high school with and go like,
Hmm.
you have perpetually thought I was a dork, but my life is better than yours.
Right.
And there's
Yeah.
no pride in that. My life is better than yours. I'm in a better place situationally, relationally, like all around, sometimes financially. I'm in a better place than you are in life. And it's not because I'm better than you. It's not because I'm smarter than you. It's not
Right.
because it's because of Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's because I'm living in the world the way that God intended human beings to do it. And it's
Mm.
working. So I'm like, hey, you need to be saved. You need to repent of your sins. You need to submit to God. And
Yeah.
then because he uplifts the humble and he crushes the proud. I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
dude, stop resisting God and things will be better for you. So I don't mean to be like we need to preach a prosperity gospel. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
But
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
every Christian should be living a better life than the atheist next to them.
Yeah.
When you look at the whole life in general, not just like I
Right.
have more, because that's not the substance. That's not what makes
Yeah.
life good. Everyone knows. So you should be able to look and go like things are going better for you than they are for the person who doesn't have God, because you do have Him,
Yeah.
and that's what really matters.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I think, all what maybe seems arbitrary to us in terms of a lot of the different laws for Israel, at least in some part, was to try to get them to live distinctly from all their neighboring
Yeah.
countries or
Yeah.
nations, so that they stood out in some way, and people would look
Yeah.
at the nation of Israel and they would go, "Man, they worship the God of Yahweh, and look how blessed they are."
Right.
And look how distinct they live, and they worship only one God. And like
Right. It just needs to be a no-brainer.
right,
Like
right,
people should just look at Christians and go, "Oh, it's a no-brainer. I want
yeah,
to be like that. I
yeah,
want my life to look like that."
right, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think I agree with what you were saying earlier when it comes to like taking over the institutions or whatever, and reclaiming those and ripping them from their postmodern foundations. It's like I'm with it, but I think, as you said earlier, there's so many levels to this. You can't retake the institution without an army, first of all.
Yeah.
It's not like so. Like we need Christians to, as you said, step up, live holy lives. I mean, Aquinas talks about how the more holy you live, the more happy you'll be. So
Right.
I agree. We should be the happiest people, not in the sense of we can't go through tragedy or any of those things,
Yeah.
but that we're living holy lives, that we have that we have healthy relationships and all those things. And I do think that the greatest indicator maybe of the climate of a nation, of where it's going, is probably if you look at its religious climate.
Yeah.
Look at how it's doing religiously, and you will absolutely know what its politics are, how people treat each other. Like
Yep.
you'll know everything from someone's religious perspectives,
Yeah.
whether it be a country or an individual. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's great stuff, Elijah. I appreciate you giving some insight and input into this. So just to clarify, you love the Olympics, is what you were telling me. After all that,
Oh yeah. Big
yeah,
time.
yeah,
The guy with his genitals hanging out of his pants, that was great. That was my favorite part. They should do that again next year.
yeah.
Next year, next Olympics. In 2028, when they come to my city, Los
Yeah.
Angeles.
Oh, that's right.
Yay! My city cannot contain the Olympics. Why are they doing that? I'm so upset about that.
What is there,
What a
like,
terrible idea.
There's like 11.5 million people in the LA metro area, right, or something like
Dude,
that.
yeah,
Like,
if you count everyone that commutes into our county, it's 15
Sure.
million people are in here every single day.
yeah,
And then you want to bring, why?
dude, yeah.
Why?
They should have done it in Wyoming.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah,
Jackson Hole. Let's do the
Yeah.
Olympics out there.
yeah. Something totally random.
They should have done it in Asbury.
Oh, now we're talking. We need to reclaim Asbury because no,
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
that's what
All right. Well, Elijah, appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming and hanging on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.